Guys, here's our intro.
We'll have a cut line eventually.
Welcome to Going Rogue. Foul throws with professional amateurs. I'm your host, Jeremy Futrell, here with...
Matt McDougal.
And we're going to talk about some shit. Yep. There, look at that. Soundbite for our intro. Right there. Nailed it. What could... It's just going to be Matt grunting. I've never been more aroused. All right. Matt, this is
my
is yours.
episode to question you.
Oh, I can't wait.
You are under interrogation now.
Am I being detained?
You know, I like to think of the first one as your job interview of me to see if I was qualified.
Ooh.
So this is your job interview now.
I'm not.
So we're going to start with that. No one cares what either of us have to say. Less so you. So, the first question we have is, who are you and why should we care?
You shouldn't care. That's a trick question. So who am I? My name is
childhood.
Jeremy. Oh, you don't want to. We don't have that. I don't remember most of it, and I've been told that's a coping mechanism. My name is Jeremy Futrell. I am currently employed by a local law enforcement agency, which I think is where we're going to leave that for the safety of me continuing to draw a paycheck to support my son. I guess if it should come up, my focus in that had always been accidents, traffic stops, car crashes, things like that, because I feel like I like to make a lot of jokes about things that I know, and those are things that I know a lot about.
Sure.
I've been involved in, I guess you would call them niche strength sports since 2017, 2018, somewhere around there, like the end of 17, beginning of 18.
So how old were you when you started, and how old are you
So I'm
now?
currently 31, so subtract, it's currently 2023. Was that 5 years?
I can't do that, man.
Me either, buddy. I
6
usually
years.
need a calculator when we're using my phone for this.
17,
For the last
26.
5 to 6 years. I've been involved
I actually had
in...
an earlier start than you.
well,
What's your strength sports?
if you're talking about strength sports in general, yes. If you're talking about Highland
You
Games,
definitely beat me to the punch. Yeah.
by a couple of years. Yeah. I'm sure we'll get into that in detail. But yeah, so strength sports in general for the last 5 to 6 years. Been in law enforcement for the last decade or more.
Sure.
And then a hodgepodge of whatever redneck jobs you could put in front of that.
Yep, naturally.
I've worked on farms. I've worked at amusement parks. I've worked at retail stores.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a little bit of everything leading up to the career path that I'm on now. I have a son who I won't talk too much about, but he's great. He'll be starting middle school next year. That's about all you guys will ever hear about him. Yeah, he's not functionally retarded, and that's awesome. He doesn't take after me. He takes after his mother. Yeah, that's kind of who I am. If I had to write a quick bio line,
Jeremy
Matt's
Futrell,
crying a
my
little.
son isn't retarded.
that's why I haven't put on his application for college. Not like my dad. Unless we can give him a 504 before then, but whatever. So yeah.
See what grants are available for him.
Yeah. We can get more into depth, but there's your bio line of who I am.
I love it.
Yeah.
I feel like a narcissistic asshole now for
God.
speaking.
No.
about it.
And I'm really trying to rein it in because I feel like I could go off on a tangent at any moment.
Right.
For any of this, but for any of you that have thrown with me for any number of times, you know that I tend to talk an exorbitant amount of shit. But if you ever actually get to know me, I am well aware that I'm only a 5,900 point athlete. Most of you are above that.
I mean, not most. I mean, 50 people.
A good number, but a good number of the people that we throw with.
That's fair.
You know?
You do put yourself in the groups where you can get better.
I'm just barely scraping into that class of people who are legitimately good at this and have been trying to be so for some number of years. So in reality, if we were all gonna, really get vulnerable here for a moment and really get into things, I really think that I'm just tapping into that level of what our sport of the Highland Games is, and where that can go, and who we're around most of the time.
Right.
And so despite being a pretty advanced level narcissist. I'm way better at that than I am at strength sports. And having a sense of humor that's developed over just decades of trauma.
If I had to surmise Jeremy,
oh yeah, please! I love that.
He's on the precipice at being okay.
At
any of the things he does. So
So if you didn't listen to episode 1, which you should, for the 12 of you listening to this and the 10 of you that did, great. For those other 2 that didn't listen to episode 1, go back, because the way I describe myself is very strong compared to very average people and not strong compared to very strong people.
He is good enough that you should listen to his advice when he gives it, and not good enough to use as a technical model.
Yes. Anytime I have broken down throws with a newer thrower, I can tell you what you're doing wrong, and I cannot tell you how to fix it. Is that teetering point that I am seated firmly on, and thank God I communicate in memes and have been able to develop a following based almost solely off of that.
That being said, Jeremy has done the hardest part of any sport, and he's put himself around people that are better than him, and I cannot.
Which is almost everyone.
Which is almost everyone, but I can't stress enough how important that is and hard to do. Most people don't have the mentality to put themselves to be a small fish in a big pond, but that is the only place that you have room to develop. Right? If you want to get better, you have to work and you have to be around people that are better.
I would much rather be a mediocre A-level athlete than a fantastic B athlete.
Absolutely.
And I think if you're going to have longevity in any sport, that is kind of where you have to be willing to put yourself. And we talked about that a little bit in the Me Talking to You episode of, we touched on environment and what you kind of wanted to create with the barn.
Right.
And where you wanted the freaks and you wanted the people that were anomalies and at the far end of the bell curve.
Yep.
And I think there's an X factor to be said about that. With any sport or any pursuit, that if you're not willing to put yourself into those positions where you're surrounding yourself with people who are better than you and who are you're gonna stagnate.
Yeah.
There's no way you could do it.
If you ever find yourself as the smartest or strongest in the room, you need to move.
Yes.
That is not a good place to be if you want to progress.
And I have never been the strongest or the smartest person in any room that I've been in. And look at me go.
In a great position.
Yeah. I'm really just advantageous as hell. So.
Great.
All right.
What made you get into, or what inspired you to get into the sport of specifically Highland Games? But before that, what was your high school sports, middle school? When did you get into athleticism, including hunting, hiking, things of that nature?
So this is a incredibly different answer from yours. So elementary and middle school, I could not have given 2 shits about athletics. Sure. I did rec league basketball for something like 12 years, from elementary all the way through high school. Just because my mom insisted I be involved in some kind of sport, which looking back makes complete sense. And I think if your kid isn't playing at least one sport or doing something physical, they probably should be. Yeah. But I've only raised one kid, so what do I know? And he's not even half done yet. So I did basketball for 12-ish years. From a rec league standpoint, we were okay, but it was a rec league in Beaver Dam, Virginia, so how good were we really?
How are you compared to the rest of the team?
So I always compared myself to Shaq, but post his prime.
Okay. Sure.
So for
downside,
those of you who have never met me, I'm 6'4" and I float around in the mid 250s, so I'm not a small human.
Have you always been taller than the rest of the class?
So that is so I never had a growth spurt. I was always just ahead above everyone else. So if you're playing rec league basketball in elementary and middle school, that makes it super easy to just get rebounds and feed it to the fast kid, which was...
Were you good or were you tall?
I was tall.
Right.
I was not good, I was tall, and that is going to be a running theme throughout the majority of my athletic career. I wasn't good, I was just big.
But you can front a 30.
Man, what you can do with a wingspan, the sky's the limit.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, mine is all arms. Yours is all chest. So yeah, it was really that. It was, we were an okay team, and we did okay, and I just got by because I was a head taller than everyone else growing up. I mean, I think I left middle school at 6 feet tall. I left high school at 6'4", 275, heavier than I am now. Like, I was never a small person. I wrestled for a few years into there, which looking back, if I had to attribute anything to my body awareness, it would probably be to like the 2.5, 3 years I did of wrestling more than anything else.
Yeah.
Like, if I were to get on a tangent, I would say get your kids wrestling or doing gymnastics or something that gets them used to their own body.
I would go on the same tangent.
Far more than I would barbell efficiency for like a 12-year-old, you know?
I think I got more out of ballet and gymnastics than I got out of football.
100%. Figure out how to move your body when you're still growing, and then once you're done growing, get strong.
Proprioception matters so much.
If you're going to find an underlying theme here, it's that Matt and I apparently agree on the various modalities of training. However we choose to implement that, I think the underlying theme is gonna keep forward throughout the conversations that we've had.
Jeremy is either smarter than he thinks, or I am an idiot, because we agree on.
I think Matt's an idiot, guy. No, I think my entire life can be surmised to real world experience versus book smart,
right?
And I think that has served me well. So yeah, wrestling for a couple of years after doing basketball. Tried some other larger team sports that I didn't really like. Like I did a year of baseball, I did a year of football, and I never really. I mean, if you're like, what was it, freshman year of high school, I did football, so I was 6'2", probably 230, which was like large, but I didn't care. So, whereas wrestling was one-on-one, and I had some stakes in that. You put me on a line, and I don't know where the ball is. It's not my job. And so I didn't give a shit, so I didn't pursue it. It had no... I got by up until 20 to 21 when I went into the academy, and I never really had a competitive bone in my body up until then.
Okay.
Like, I could do a roll, and it was fine, but I'd never at any point throughout being a teenager or in my early 20s would you have been like, can you do this? And I'd have been like, fuck yeah, I can. No. That was not how I approach many things until I went through the academy and got in halfway okay shape by the time I came out of it.
Where did you, to clarify, police academy? And what county were you in?
Yeah. So I've wrestled with whether I'm going to tell y'all whether I work where I work or not, because I don't want to involve the policies of any...
Put a flag here. Okay.
Oh, you turned it off. You sent it. Add a flag. So basically, I work in the Central Virginia area.
Right.
So I don't know that we need to edit that out. I'm just not going to get super specific, but just to give you guys an idea of the general region I work at, it's just north of Richmond. So like there's a good mix of rural, but also businesses, and it's a up and coming county, but we're not Richmond City, you know. So we're kind of stuck in the middle. But so did the academy there, made some friends in other adjunct regions of like Commonwealth attorneys' offices and fire and EMS and all those sorts of things, and got into, it was the lightest I'd ever been, so I left the academy at probably 225.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, which I'm 6'4", so being 6'4", 225 was like relatively light.
Yeah.
That being said, not very strong. I think my max bench leaving the academy was like 185.
And bench is the metric that matters most.
Absolutely. If you don't give a shit about how much you bench, mine definitely was so far above, oh yeah, no. So I was a mediocre strength-wise, but I was very light. So I got into doing like obstacle course races and things like that with some friends. So I ran some Tough Mudders and some Spartan races, and I didn't know enough to know what was competitive. I just did them because they were fun. Mm-hmm. Did that for probably like a year and a half. So I left the academy in 2013. So probably 13 to 15 was races, obstacle course races, because regular races seem really boring.
Sure.
And apparently I have ADD. And that's something I didn't become aware of until the last year and a half or so. Let me find Matt a drink here, folks. So I didn't put two and two together as to why that was the loudest can pop in the history of can. That was great. Yeah, we are brought to you by Ultra Sunrise, ladies and gentlemen, because it has kept us rolling. So yeah, I did that, and it was relatively fun. it was a good time, but it's not like I was there. If I had bothered to look up leaderboards, I would have been far from good, quote unquote, at it. But it kept me in shape and it kept me doing something. And through doing all that, I was working out. And I was like, wait a second, what if I just tried to get strong? I was like, I have a relatively large frame compared to most guys at any given Kroger. So if I were to just try and do that for a while, let's see where that would go. So then I just piddled around for probably about a year. And I was like, oh, do I bodybuilding or do I just get strong? But it's going to be weight room related. So let me try that because I finally, through the course of the academy and work, like developed somewhat of a competitive mindset. So we went into that and ultimately I was like, I'm going to try powerlifting. Let me see how that goes. So I trained for a powerlifting meet for about a year because if I'm going to do something, I was like, I want to be halfway good at it. I don't want to go in being horrible, which is not good advice. If you ever want to do something, just go do it. Who gives a shit? All this is made up. Time isn't real. Do whatever makes you happy, bud.
Unless it hurts people.
Yeah. Unless it hurts people, and then I have to run to you at work, and I'm not as nice. But so I did that, and I signed up for the Virginia State Championships at like the end of, I want to say 2017, which is when, if anyone knows the name Pete Rubish, he was really big in the sport at that time. And so I lucked out, and I signed up for Classic Raw, and he signed up for Raw. So technically, me and Pete Rubish both walked away with gold medals in the same weight class, and he out-totaled me by like 900 pounds.
Right.
And it was... So there are pictures of me on my Facebook somewhere of me holding a gold medal going, eh.
Do you remember what your total was?
Like 12-12.
Okay, hell yeah.
Like, and that takes me back to the, again, compared to a normal person, am I strong? Yes. Compared to a strong person, I am abundantly normal.
It's not even 2 lifts. Right?
It's not, right?
That's
like
not your squat, your deadlift. So,
it's
but
can any guy that you pick out of a fast food line total 12-12? No. But
I think Rogue makes a shirt for 1,000-pound club, so 20% better than that on the first one.
And could I nowadays potentially total a good bit higher than that if I trained for it and peaked for it? Yeah, I'm pretty confident in that statement. But I'm not trying to do that right now, and we'll get into that. So it was like I went and did the powerlifting meet, and it was fine. Powerlifting is boring as shit. Like, I don't know what kind of mindset you need to think that that's a great way to spend your day, but it's not whatever mindset I have. Like, it was fine, and I hit the numbers relatively close to what I wanted to hit. Like, it was over a 400 squat, over a 500 deadlift, and close to a 300 bench. Right. Like, for someone who hadn't been doing that long, I was like, numbers. Oh, yeah, it's okay. But Ray Williams is a real human. And so what am I doing here, man? Like,
yeah, your total is only 100 pounds more than Ray's squat.
Yes. So it's it's also kind of that downside of being a larger framed person. Right. Whether it's powerlifting or strongman, I will never compete in a weight class light enough to compete with the freaks that exist. Like, it just doesn't exist. I cannot competitively operate sub 245. Like, it's not out there. And so in the powerlifting world, that's going to be guys totaling over 2,000 pounds. And in the strongman world, that's going to be guys pulling probably close to 800 pounds. Like, it's not going to happen. And so I had to find something else that I enjoyed doing. And that was when I ended up stumbling into the Highland Games. So I want to say it was the end of 2017. I went and watched the Richmond Highland Games. Mm-hmm. And it was a horrible day, and it was pouring down rain, because anyone that's ever gone to Richmond knows that you have one day of good weather and one day of shit weather, and that is how that game goes. And so it was the day of shit weather, and it must have been a Sunday, because I ran into Jerry Witzman, who walked over and was like, hey, you're a big guy, you must be here to throw. And I was like, I don't know what's happening right now, man. And we chatted for a little bit, and come to find out he was planning on moving to an area nearish me, because prior to him moving to Beaver Dam, he lived in Northern Virginia, and he's like, hey, within the next year or so, we're gonna be moving to this area, and look us up on Facebook, yada yada. Which anyone who's trying to get into the Highland Games, if you don't have Facebook, apparently that is the Soul Medium, which...
Unfortunately, that is the best way to find games.
God bless it. It is, and so if you create a Facebook solely to find games, I don't blame you at all. So I found Jerry, and I was like, okay. But also, if you've ever just tried to go online and Google Highland Games, good luck. Yeah. Because every one of our websites is run off a modem from the 1990s, and it is hard to find. So I stumbled into finding a strongman competition in Concord, North Carolina, down at Norse Fitness. And this was in I want to say 18. I'm horribly bad with time, so please don't drag me on social media saying that I was a year off from any of these, because I'm bad at this. But so I found a competition that Andy with Norse was putting on in conjunction with Paul Mouser. Went down there, competed in the novice division, won. Got a little trophy sitting in my office. It's one of the bigger trophies I own, despite it being a novice competition. So shout out to whoever they got to sponsor those prizes. Went down there, won 8 of the 9 events that we competed in. I was like, oh, okay, I could be halfway okay at this. But for anyone that doesn't know, if you compete in a Highlander, it is typically a lot of throwing and moving events as opposed to static events, which I found I was better at. So in prepping for that, because again, I didn't like to go into anything unprepared, like I bought a 56-pound weight. I cut myself a caber, like I'd formulated all this stuff. I wanted to practice very specifically, and the events that I do really well in coincided more with the Highland Games than with Strongman. So I went down there, and it was where I met Chad Clark, who, if you don't follow him, you should. And if you don't know him, you should, because he's an angel in a 305-pound body. Just an absolute silver fox. But just a great dude who kind of was able to point me in the general direction. Him and another guy who I'm doing a disservice if I don't shout out, I know he's not as involved now, was Alex Armour. He's not as well liked as Chad, I think. But to his credit, he got me involved in this. He pointed me in some good directions. And I think I'm doing a disservice if I don't point him out. He was our class judge. And so I warmed up at like 16 feet on weight over bar. He was like, where are you coming in? And I was like, I don't know, man. I've never done this before.
To cut into Jeremy's backstory here, I never did touch on why I got into the Highland Games. And
that's right.
That is Chad Clark. I was doing a strongman comp.
And I feel like I glazed over that because I knew, but they don't know.
I was doing a strongman comp in Northern Virginia, and one of the events of our strongman comp was a 22-pound slam ball power throw for distance.
He threw it like 38 feet?
Yeah, I threw it 38 feet.
And
he was like, hey, that's an event in Highland Games, you should do it. And he said, I'll sign you up for the next one we have. And then
by the next one we have, he meant the next one he had.
Correct. And then he signed up for Moss Wrestling instead and blah, blah, blah. But
because anyone who's mildly athletic, Chad is going to get you into Moss Wrestling. We're going to get there in my order of events.
Absolutely. So go on. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I, long story short, with North Carolina, did this novice event, won everything but the pole push. Because I think they lumped all the super heavies into ours. And there was a guy in our group that was like 350 pounds. Who he wasn't the most athletic guy in the world. I couldn't push him out of a ring. Right. It was what it was. Yeah. So won that. And because I'm very much a stickler for rules, I was like, well, I just won a novice event in Strongman Corp. So I have to go into the open. But because I had made some connections, I ended up finding Highland Games, which, if this helps anyone, NASGA and heavy events, if you're on the East Coast, or throwshag.org are your 3 things that you want to Google. There you go. If you're anywhere near Virginia and North Carolina, I have helped you find every game that is near us. You're welcome. So I found those and I ended up signing up for some. And so before that year was out, I ended up competing in the Green Hill Highland Games, which were put on by Chad. I want to say it was 17. It may have been 18. And I'd
Green Hill is a big Highland Games for anyone that doesn't know.
Yes.
It unfortunately is not coming back this year, and the continuation of the game is up for question at this moment.
And it's in no way contingent upon the athletes or any of that stuff. It is the city trying to find space and money, I think is my understanding. Correct. I could be wrong. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth.
No,
but
it is absolutely comes down to a funding issue.
Yeah, but it's a fantastic...
Green Hill is large enough that, like, if you are someone that has won Green Hill, you're probably going to go pro.
Yes. So anyway, for those of you that don't know, SHAG or SHAG affiliated games in this case have a B class, an A class, and then a pro class at most of your East Coast events.
Do you want to explain what that means?
So Bs are quote unquote lower level throwers, not to throw shade on anyone that's doing it, but in order to progress from a B to an A, you have to throw certain marks in at least 3 out of 4 of the events. I think at least one of your hammers, both your weights, and one of your stones. I think they've set a metric, or maybe your weight over bar.
It doesn't matter.
Point being, go Google it. Look up go to the SHAG website. I've had a couple drinks. But point being, you have to throw a certain distance or height in whatever event and win a game in order to become an A-class athlete, right? And so that's kind of, you could win a B-class game, but if you threw against a bunch of B-class throwers who were not of a certain caliber, you technically shouldn't be an A-class athlete. But if you throw against a bunch of competitive B-class guys and you throw good marks, congrats, you now get to move on to the A-class, and then eventually, if you feel that you're throwing well enough, you can throw your head in the ring as a pro. For those that don't know, going pro in the Highland Games is really just saying, I want to throw as a pro, and hoping that enough ADs like you, and that part of it is numbers and part of it is personality of, are you going to get those invites? Are those ADs going to reach out to you and say, hey, I've got a game coming up in November, September, August, July, whatever. Do you want to come throw? Here's what we're paying. Have at it. Yeah. So there is a set metric from B to A and then pro. If you go really far down the line, you may end up with a C class or a novice class somewhere along the line. But most of the time, those guys are going to fall into your B class. It just is what it is. So I threw in Green Hill. If Matt wants to, it's going to take too long. It was either 17 or 18. I don't remember, but it was the end of the year. I want to say 18. So end of 2018, I threw at Green Hill, and I came in thinking I was hot shit, man. I threw like 16 or 17 feet at that, Highlander I did, and I threw the tire that we threw like super far, and it was going to be awesome. And I was cleaning house because, of course, B class doesn't throw traditional order. So we started with height events and everything. So I'm mopping the floor with everyone, and then we got to weights, and I think I threw like a 16-foot heavyweight and like a 35-foot lightweight, and the first place lead I had went out the door to someone who had practiced this at least once or twice. So I ended up taking like 4th or something, which was enough to get me invested in going, wait a second, I turned a caber at my first game. I threw a 13-foot weight over a bar. I had okay stones. So, all right, I got to fix my weights and my hammers, and if I can, spoiler alert, 5 years later, I'm still trying to fix my weights and my hammers. But if I can try this and get good at it, we can actually put together some semblance of being competitive. Because I was able to put that together enough, knowing what I did about Strongman when I did the Strongman show. I was like, I can go to this show and do well, because it's a lot of... Anyway, realized that I could be competitive at it. Like, the numbers I was putting up, for those of you that don't know, like a 13-foot weight over bar, because that's always been one of my better events. Like, every once in a while, you get a pro athlete that did no heights at 13. It happens. Not super often, but maybe nowadays. I don't know. Our sport's been weird over the last year. But, point being, there were events that I was relatively competitive at, and only a few that I had to bring up, and I was like, and I had fun. For anyone that's looking into trying the Highland Games, I cannot enforce enough that it is by far the most fun thing you'll do.
The best environment.
I would say that powerlifting is going to be boring as shit, and unless you were just there to jack yourself off, you're going to have a bad time. Mm-hmm. Like, unless you, that pool has gotten so deep that if you were a man my size or Matt's size, if you're not squatting 800 plus pounds, you're not even going to be mildly competitive. No. So good luck. But if you enjoy that, I'm not discouraging you from trying a strength sport. Have at it, but enjoy blowing out your shit. Or starting steroids. Both are options. Strongman, I would put it a close second. Because I think if you can pick your shows intelligently and your people that are putting on your shows and all that sort of stuff, I've had a lot of fun at a lot of the strongman shows that I've been to. I can't shout out Paul Mouser enough, because I have to not jump too far into the future, typically what I had done for a number of years was I would throw Highland games up until the middle of the year. And then around July, it tends to slow down. I don't know if it just gets too hot or if there just weren't games in our area or what. But typically what I would do is around July, I'd go do one strongman show every year in West Virginia with Paul. I'd have a blast. I'd podium because I'm better than you. No, because it was a lot of fun and because they were Highlander events and because they had 2 or more throwing events. And if you're attracting mostly a strongman crowd, I can out-throw several people and make up my points there. I'm going to eat this bratwurst while I talk because this is a podcast run by fat guys.
You can't tell by the heavy.
No. But yeah, so I found out I wouldn't be horrible at it. Filled in some time with strongman stuff. Leading up to COVID was when I really 2019 was arguably the strongest I had ever been up until I'd say like right now, this exact moment that we're recording this in 2023. Like I won one of Paul's shows in West Virginia that qualified me for Strongman Nationals through OSG. Or whichever. Strongman Corps. It's like qualified for Nationals. Didn't go because I am well aware that I won that show because it had throwing events. Like, I think it had heavyweight for distance and weight over bar. Try to get a bunch of strongmen to actually throw heavyweight for distance, you're gonna have a poor time. Like, spin around with a 56-pound weight. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's gonna knock you on your ass.
Grab a 45-pound plate, put it on the rim, and then spin in circles.
Yeah. You're gonna have a shitty time.
Keep in mind, people can do more than that much weight for over 50.
I can pull 400 pounds for like dozens of reps. Right. It doesn't matter because when you knock that down to 50 pounds and spin around in a fucking circle, that shit gets hard. Like, if you've never picked up the 56 for distance, it's hard to put into... You're going to think we're talking out of our ass. You're going to be, it's 56 pounds. No, you try to throw it more than 15 feet. And when you do, good for you. So anyway, I qualified for Nationals that year. Didn't go because I looked at the weights and I was like, oh, they're doing a 750 deadlift for reps in my weight class, which if I'm 6'4", 250 pounds, like there's some monsters in that arena, and I'm not competitive. I'm not going to waste someone's time judging me to no rep of a bunch of events at the games. I'm not going to do that. So
$1,000 of travel and entry fee.
God bless it. No, I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to put my time and my energy into a sport that I'm competitive in, and if once in a blue moon I go do a strongman show, whether it's to support a friend that just opened a gym, or if it's because I have spare time in July and they're doing relatively light Atlas stones and throwing events, I'm in. But that just is what it is. So that was probably, I was knocking on the door of like a 30-60 weight season, like toward the end of 2019. Like I was regularly throwing like 28 for distance in terms of the heavyweight and upper 50s in the lightweight, and things were going good. And then COVID hit, and for like 2 years, we just didn't have games. And it kind of was what it was. And there's no point in going into detail over that. We just didn't have games for 2 years, and I kept up training for about 6 months, and then everyone realized we weren't pulling out of that, and life got in the way. But yeah, so, during that time, I competed in Moss Wrestling. So our friend Chad Clark, who we'll talk about probably ad nauseum throughout every episode, because we fucking love you. God, we love Chad Clark.
If you're wondering about Chad Clark's character, he's basically Radagast.
Yes, there is no more appropriate analogy than Radagast.
Yeah,
for Chad Clark.
He smokes his pipe weed and he hand feeds raccoons.
He's got 16 cats under his hat.
Yeah, and 2 dozen raccoons, and he feeds deer by hand. And he's a wizard that lives in the woods.
100%.
And has a 400 pound
Yeah.
And it's Chad.
For a guy of, how old is Chad?
Just over 40.
Yeah. For a guy that's just over 40 but looks like he's just over 50, he's a real tank.
Have you ever seen a sea lion or a seal, and you made that into a human being?
It's Chad Clark.
Chad is the animorph of a seal.
Yes. God, what a great series.
Yeah.
We need to bring back Animorphs. That'll be our next venture that yields us no money.
Yes.
But yeah, so what the hell was I talking about, Matt?
Check.
Oh, so Moss Wrestling is where this was going. So toward the end of 2019, one of the strongman events that I did in North Carolina, or no, sorry, West Virginia with Paul, had Moss Wrestling as one of the events. And I don't know if you guys know this, and I'm not shitting on any of my friends that exclusively do strongman. Y'all can't move for shit. I love you. You will deadlift 17 times what I can. You can't move laterally, and I don't know what the problem is.
Try to get some XY separation.
For the love of God, stop using straps so often and move left to right.
Start doing some Romanian things.
So anyway, they had Moss Wrestling as a portion of that event, and then another one that I did. And long story short, Chad ended up saying, "You're kind of okay at this. You want to go to Poland with me for Worlds?" And I was able to pull that off. And so I was able to travel with some super cool people over to Poland for part of the Moss World Cup. Ultimately, I didn't do hot. I won like one round. And it was what it was. Shout out to Nicole, the one American athlete to fucking podium. She killed it. But met some super cool people. Got to technically say that, like, hey, I competed at a world level in an international competition. I didn't medal, but, like, you know what? I was there. I got invited. I went. I did the thing. I still have a little lanyard hanging up in my little Team USA jacket somewhere. So, you know, it got to go and cross that off of a bucket list. And since then, it's resulted in a few invites to go do other fun Moss things. But Matt and I have had this conversation of, I am decent at Moss Wrestling for the people that are currently competing in the sport. Do I think I could be good if we actually got everyone who could be good involved? Not necessarily. I'm reasonable in that. But they're not doing it. Right. Honestly, neither have I since 2019. But it's a weird catch-22. I would love to. Right now my time is better spent trying to put that energy into my throws and trying to get stronger for the purposes of Highland Games, trying to throw further for the purpose of Highland Games. The juice is not worth the squeeze to become a better Moss wrestler. My throws are going to suffer. And the sport that I could arguably actually be good in would suffer for the sake of a sport I could be okay at just because of where it is and its growth right now. Like, Moss Wrestling is fairly small, and I could be one of those guys who, like, was really good for his time, but ultimately wasn't shit. Or I could go throw numbers that are beyond what the pros in the 80s were throwing in the Highland Games and still only be moderately okay and try to just keep getting better. So I'd rather put my time there and do something that ultimately is super enjoyable. Yeah. And a grip comp here or there. So I went to go do a Moss competition in Norfolk. That ended up getting canceled. It was supposed to be with Chad down at Brew Gym. Yep. Ended up getting canceled because no one was there. So me and Chad did a demo, and then they also just had a grip competition going on while I was there. And I took third in it. And I think to this day, I'm still on the leaderboard for one of the grip events for that competition. Which is like just a fun little braggy thing. Because I'm like, hey, there's Martin Lisis, if you've ever heard of him, and I'm 2 spots under him. But again, that's one of those things because that event doesn't get contested that much.
Did you meet Stan?
Yes, so that is the one that I met Stan at. So Stan was doing an arm wrestling competition. It was supposed to be a whole, like, giant strength event at Brute. They were supposed to have Moss wrestling and grip and arm wrestling and you name it, it was going to be there. Moss ended up getting canceled. So I jumped in on the grip and then agreed to help Chad just run a demo. And Stan, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Waluigi?
Walku.
Yeah.
Professional arm wrestler.
Mm-hmm. Very good at his chosen sport.
Yep.
Was there, and we... Oh, God, we're almost out of Jameson.
No. The rum.
I swear I'm better at impressions when I'm not chewing on bratwurst. So, yeah, I met Stan down there. He seemed really interested in Moss wrestling.
He's still interested in it, and I told him I would help him train for it whenever he's ready for it. And he asked when the next competition was, and I said,
whenever you put it on, because no one else around here does.
Whenever I decide to host one. So
that is, for anyone that doesn't know about Moss wrestling, it is a very unique where did it originate? Scandinavia, that sort of Eastern European
It's
to
a
Nordic
Viking sport, and it's
Yeah.
spread all over the world, basically. There's a version even...
I think its
with-
the largest portion is in like the Russia, Eastern European group right now.
Well, so it actually made it all the way to the Americas.
Well,
So
we did it.
Well, even before that, it's the same sport as Indian stick wrestling.
Yes.
Except you're sitting down on a board, and so but it is the same sport. And if you want to go into the migration of people, then the people that came from Yakutia, Russia, are now current Native Americans. But at least by current
It's
estimates, but,
MAS wrestling
which
for
is
anyone that.
the Yakutian word for stick. The Yakutians are the native Russian people that look shockingly like Native Americans. So,
Gorgeous.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll leave that in. Just for character and realism. But yeah, so Moss wrestling and grip, kind of tangentially. But to sum it up, I discovered that Highland Games was kind of one of those things that I naturally could be good at. So that was where it was worth putting my time and effort. And life got in the way, had some to not get into it super hard, like deaths in the family, that sort of thing. The year that COVID started to end and games came back, I couldn't go do. So this year has kind of been the first full season back. Or I've gotten to actually put some gas into it. And it's been going pretty well, like all things considered. So,
For sure.
yeah.
For sure. Follow-up questions. I don't have your list or the forethought. Let me see your...
You want to look at the list that I asked you?
Yeah.
Here we go. All right. Hopefully this is all still rolling.
Excellent. Who is me? Yes.
Yeah, just read it all. This makes for great radio.
Who is Matt McDougall?
Well, what is?
Tell me about your Crohn's.
I don't have it.
So goals in the sport. That's a
Okay.
good one. Currently goals in any sport, but specifically Highland Games. Where are you now? Where do you see yourself by the end of the year? And then what are your long-term goals in the sport, either as
Sweet.
an athlete or director?
Yeah, so spoiler alert, Matt used the word director. We have a meeting later this week to see if Matt and I can put on an event. Hopefully that ends up happening. I think whether this one ends up happening or not, I think it's kind of an inevitable crescendo.
It's going to happen.
Yeah. We're two people who know enough people to be dangerous. In whatever way you want to take that. But yeah, so goals in this sport or any other sport. I don't have goals in any other sport. While I enjoy, and let's say by next year life levels out to the point of where it was pre-COVID, and I'm able to do strongman 1 to 2 shows a year, I don't care.
Right.
I'm going to pick Highlander events just because I'd rather podium than not podium. I'm not trying to spend $500 to go travel somewhere and not do half. I want to leave with something. I'm fine with it not being a win. I came in 3rd behind Steve Schmidt one year. I'm not going to beat Steve. I'm aware of who I am as a person. But so I have no hard goals in terms of other sports. But in terms of Highland Games, for those of you that don't know, there are 9 events. Hypothetically, and we found out the math is slightly off here, but in theory, all throwers in North America are ranked. If you were to hold the record in all 9 events, you would have 9,000 points. There are 1,000 points per event. And however far off of that world record you are determines your points, right? So if you were an 8,000 point athlete, you'd be really, really good, and so on and so forth. So Matt is currently, if his scores get put in, around 10th in NASGA.
Yeah, 10 for amateurs, around 7,000 points.
7,000 points to
over.
put you just inside of the top 10, right?
Yep.
So I'm sitting at around 5,900 points, which puts me, I think, last checking around 55th.
Yeah, top 60 for sure.
Earlier in the year, it was around 50th, but as more games happen, other throwers are going to throw their first or second game of the year and get warmed up, and that's cool. I think it's fair to say that 6,000 points is kind of that breaking point of where you're inarguably a decent A. You know,
That's where you could
where you don't
start
have a hole
winning.
in your armor. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have a bad event if you're throwing 6,000 points on a regular basis. So the short-term goal is to break 6. I'm at 5,900. It's super doable. We just, due to field size and logistics, you don't always get to throw all 9 events at every game you go to. So it is what it is. We're going to throw what we get to throw. But I'd be very comfortable saying if I showed up well-rested and feeling good, I could break 6,000 points. In the next game I did, if they gave me the opportunity to throw those events that I don't have a lot of marks in. Into the season, I think you and I both qualified for ECCs. I'm not going to win ECCs. I know what I'm about, son. I would like to go to ECCs and not finish last. I would love to finish inside of the top 10 for ECCs. I think right now we have around 18 athletes showing up. So if I could finish in the top 2/3 of ECCs, I think that's...
You had mentioned ECCs. You're thinking about limiting the number of athletes. Do you know anything more about that? Or...
It is my understanding that we're going to stay around 18 athletes, I think. I think they put out the invite list. Whoever responded, responded, and whoever didn't. That is not my decision to make. But hopefully it stays around that, just because the logistics of running a 20-plus athlete flight become absolutely nightmarish.
Yeah.
But hypothetically, if ECC stays around 18 to 20 people, if I could finish inside of that top 15 to 10 people, that'd be great. I think there are definitely some people there I can beat, and I think for sure there are some people there that I cannot. So if I could show up and throw what I consider good numbers for me for that point in the year, I think that would be good. Let's say if I'm able to peak for that game, I think 6,200-ish points for the year is a realistic goal for the 2023 season. If I could end somewhere around 6,200, sweet. And then the goal for next year would be to, hopefully fairly early in the season, come in around 6,500 points. Throwing on the East Coast is a really weird thing. And so, like, if we get a super cold, super snowy winter, it really kicks your throwing in the nuts. You spend a lot more time in the gym than you do throwing, which I think, despite the fact that I'm not incredibly advanced from a strength perspective, I'm relatively strong in this chosen sport. So I don't need to spend a ton of time in the gym. I need to throw more. And if we get snowed in all winter, it's going to kick me in the balls. And it would take a little while to warm up to. But 6,200 is the goal by the end of this year. 6,000 is the goal, hopefully within the next game or two. And then ultimately the goal would be to be a 6,500 athlete. I think early on next year is very doable with the group of people that I've got around me and what we have going on. I think it's pretty doable.
Yep. I completely agree with that. To follow that up, where do you think your best event and weakness is? Not based on points, but what do you feel the most comfortable in your ability to progress? And not your favorite, but like, what do you feel like this is the event that you're going to really stand out in the future as a weapon? And what do you feel like is your weakness?
I feel like my better events are my more favorite events, which would be height events and caber. So unlike Matt, I do not have a collegiate or high school throwing background. So I'd never thrown anything until I came into this event, which anyone else who's mirrored that, I think, tends to be that you take very well to the non-collegiate precursor events, and you tend to excel more in the other ones. So, like, I throw weight over bar okay. That is finally starting to move up and feel smooth. So I think it's fair to say that 12 to 13 is kind of that passing point for A's, and then your good pros throw 15 and up. I threw 13 at my first game. I've consistently thrown 13 for the last 5 years. Never put much effort into it. And then this year, I think that progressing, quote unquote, rapidly for the event that it is fair. So my wob is moving up. Sheaf is going well. I think if I can actually not leave it out in front like I did at Port City, I think we've got a high 20 to almost 30 year on the cusp. And then Caber has always just been a good event for me. As long as it's not a super weird one, or if I'm just not paying attention. To talk about Port City one more time, that was a weird Caber. Anyone who says it's not is a liar, and I'll fight you. Just kidding. But it was a super wonky Caber, and honestly, I didn't go to Port with any hopes of podium. And I came to throw well in a few events, and I did okay at that, and I moved on. So my better events and the ones that I'm progressing most in would probably be Wob and Chief. I think my stone and my heavyweight are kind of on the cusp of jumping. So I was able to throw a really good feeling 29-foot heavyweight, which is competitive, right? Like that's a decent A mark. 30 feet is kind of that breaking point to where if I can get that consistent and throw 29 plus in every game I go to for the rest of the year, I'm going to be feeling okay. Hopefully lightweight is going to start moving well. We had a really, really good practice the other day that I think was one of the more progressive or productive. That's the PR word I'm looking for. Lightweight practices I've had in a while where things are starting to click. So hopefully that moves well, but it can move all the grade it wants to at practice. If it doesn't do it in comp, it doesn't matter. No one's measuring practice throws and putting them in the NASGA. Well, we're measuring them. We're just not putting them in the NASGA. So we're not going to tell you. But yeah, and everything else. So about a month ago, I threw in West Virginia in an absolute crapshoot of a day and threw PRs in like 4 of the events that we threw. Like I PR'd both hammers, I PR'd open stone. Things just moved really well. And for those of you that may not have been throwing for a while, that tends to be the way that throwing goes, is that everything kind of stagnates for a while and you just get consistent inside of this bubble or bell curve or whatever metaphor you want to use for the zone that you're in. And then it'll pop forward by 2, 3, 4 feet when some other cue starts to click regularly. And so Mountain State being, I think, the second game I'd thrown of the year, I had finally gotten a good number of practices under me. Things started to pop well and to actually move forward. And so that was good. Both of my hammers came up, my open stone, all of that started to move well, despite the fact that it was an absolute just downpour of rain the entire time. I have completely forgotten whatever the lead-in question was here, Matt.
The lead-in question was best and worst events.
Best and worst. So yeah, best is arguably my height events and my caber. Worst events is for sure lightweight for distance. And from there on out, you can make an argument for any of my distance throws. I just think, like we mentioned earlier, knocking on the door of 6,000 points, I don't think it's fair to say that any of my events are bad. I've made a conceded effort to be a well-rounded thrower, and I think it's the only thing that keeps me competitive, because I have been the guy that's only good at 1 to 2 events and tried to have that carry them through a game, and once you start throwing against good people, that doesn't cut the mustard anymore. Like, you can't do it. You can show up and throw 2 good events all you want to, you're not going to podium in a field of 8+ throwers if you only have 2 events that are good. It's just not going to happen.
Yep, absolutely. It is much better to take top 3 in every event than to win 1 and 0.
Yes, because because inevitably you're going to end up throwing against those guys that only have good height events or only have good weight throws or only have good stones, whatever. You're going to beat them because you stayed third in everything, and you're going to pull out a top 2 finish because they ate 9 to 12 points when it came to another event that you didn't have to eat, you know?
Yeah. Jeremy absolutely would have beat me at my first games, even though I was throwing the open stone close to 50 feet with a track and field background, and I think my Braemar at that games was like a 37 or 38, which are relatively good numbers. But, you know, with the way my weights and hammers were, or with the way my weights and height events were, having not, weights and sheaf, having not done them, like I think I came in last at Chief. I threw a 22.
Yeah.
Never having done it. Wes Kaiser and Jonathan Harding gave me some great advice, and I was able to very quickly...
Almost like those guys are good at Chief.
Right. Was able to very quickly progress that, but you can absolutely, and you should, focus on your worst events. My worst events were weights, and the things that has catapulted me into being a really good thrower last year, or a decently good thrower last year, and a top-level amateur this year, is focusing on my worst events. It's getting my hammers up, my weights up.
Yeah. Attempting to finish the episode about me, not knowing if all of the episodes are actually recorded on here. But if there are gaps that we need to fill, we'll fill them.
We'll figure it out.
We'll
put something in there.
Whatever, man. We'll always put something in there.
Mm-hmm.
What on earth were we talking about,
Oh,
Matt?
you filled it up. On to the next question.
Okay, on to the next question.
I'm not going to end it here, but I would like to know, if you had a magic wand and you could change any one thing about the Highland Games, what thing would you change?
Oh, man. That is super tough to narrow it down to one thing. I really liked your answer of changing the public perception. Man. I think if it's a truly magic wand, and we don't have to nerd out too much on how much...
on how to make it actually happen.
Yeah. What is a magic wand actually...
More of the limitations.
Right? Yeah. It would come down to resources.
Okay.
I think if we could have unlimited resources, we could do something really cool.
Sure.
Like if hypothetically we had enough money into the sport and judges and whatever you wanted, even if just for a year, we could grow the sport to a certain point to where it could then sustain itself at a higher level.
Okay.
Like if we could hypothetically have exuberant number of classes of athletes, of judges, of awards, of space to compete in, if we could just multiply that for a year, you could really influence some things. If you could give every game a novice group, a good group, a pro group, a open women's, an elite women's, and some masters classes, and just give everyone the fairest shake. Despite my job, and despite knowing that people suck, I think if we gave them the utmost opportunity, which is I hope is what we're going to do if we are able to put a game together and to make it really athlete driven of here is your best shot at doing your best job, I think that could make such a huge dent that everything else would fall into place afterward. If you could unequivocally promise athletes, here's a space where you can show up and everything is done for you and you just have to show up and throw all nine and throw it well and put your best foot forward, I think everything else would fall into place behind it. Because while we don't have... and I'm torn because there's the argument of we don't have athletes without the festival. I don't think you have a good festival without the athletes. You don't have one without the other. And so for everyone that says, well, you have to sacrifice this, that, and the other for the, festival so that we can have the opportunity to throw, like I hear you and I understand it and you're not wrong. But I think if you took the athletics out of any of these festivals, I think within 2 years they would just die. If all you had was a bunch of vendors and 70-year-old dudes with long swords, and someone singing The Weight of the World over and over again, I don't think you would have a sustainable thing. I think you have to have good athletics in order to showcase the festival and vice versa. So I won't take the, oh no, not a narcissistic standpoint. I will take the narcissistic standpoint. If I could wave a magic wand, it would be to give all the games for 1 year, the most athletes, the opportunity to be the most competitive. That's my magic wand. I don't know how I'd word that wish to where a genie wouldn't turn around and fuck me for it, but if we're getting really old school here.
So I don't know that our answers are all that different then in function, right?
Well, I think both of us we both want the same thing.
Right.
We both want a larger, more productive sport body.
Right.
Ooh, you know what? Creative second potential answer. One governing body with standards.
Ooh, dangerous.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's a magic wand. I can do what I want with it. Let's say I wave that magic wand, and all of a sudden we're all under one governing body with one set of standards that has a productive, unified database, that has a productive set of standards and rules. Ooh, I think we might be on to... If I could, because that is a logistical undertaking that is almost too Herculean for anyone. Many people have tried. I think Hayden tried to redo the database, and I don't know what the fuck he's doing nowadays. I love you, Hayden, but where you been? Cabermetrics tried to do it with stats and all that, and I think they did a good job, but it wasn't in totality. I think
Incomplete at the moment.
so many people have tried, and the trouble is that the sport has spread through all of North America. But how do you get everyone on the same page? Because you're going to have people on the West Coast that want a wing trig and want these nice, pretty pine cabers that are all super straight. But you have your East Coast throwers who are phenomenal sheaf throwers and have wonky cabers. And they're like, so if I could wave them, changing my answer, changing it, fuck it. I would unify everything. Everyone is going to forget whatever they initially wanted or didn't want. And we're all going to have a unified body with a set of metric standards to where we all know exactly what we're getting. And I think we'd accomplish the same goal as if we gave athletes their best foot to stand on. Because I think if throughout North America we had a set governing body that was driven by the athletes and for the athletes, I think you'd accomplish the same thing, but neater. You know?
Yeah, no, for sure. That's that would definitely be a good choice. If we were to try to make that actually happen in practice, the idea of adding big government in anything is always a little...
Oh, God.
Right.
That's why this is a magic wand and not a real wand.
Yes,
because
I want
in
big government
reality,
that works.
we are currently taking the states' rights approach.
Yep.
And in practical human application, I actually like this more.
Right.
I'm fine making the individual adjustment of knowing I'm throwing out a shag game. Here's what I need to look forward to. Mm-hmm. And if I don't choose to throw at a shag game, here are the sacrifices I am or am not making. And the same for a Massa game, the same for a GSLSSA or whatever. You know, that is a burden that is on me. And for a realistic standpoint, I accept that. It is the nature of the beast, and that is what it is.
If you were to put on your own games, which is something we're actively working towards.
We're trying, people.
Right. We're not just shitting on the sport.
Yeah. We're not going to sit here and talk shit about you guys and try not to actually do something. And we love all of you.
If and when we host the Jeremy Futrell Classic. What would you do different than the games that you've competed in or participated in or watched that you feel would make the games, one, more publicly approachable so that people can compete in it that have interest, and what would you do to make it better for the athletes that are already in the competition? What would be special about your game specifically that you feel like would, what would make you stand out?
Okay, so I had to write that down because you and I together have finished how many fluid ounces of jam? A bunch. So making it better for the public and more accessible to the public. An idea that you and I have tossed around. Man, this is going to be twofold. So one is making it so it's a game on Saturday and something else on Sunday. I don't think we've completely fleshed out what that would be, whether it's half demo, half 5-event game, half whatever. I think that step number one is having a person at the tent, at the border of the crowd, who isn't the announcer, who isn't your pro class. As great as it is for us to say, hey, the job of your pro class isn't just to throw well, it's to go talk to people. Okay, cool. Why the fuck not just pay this other guy $100 for the day to go talk to people? I like that idea along with it. I'm not saying don't have personable people at your games. I will talk to a brick wall all day long. I would love to show up and talk to people. I'm literally talking to a cell phone sitting on a cat scratching post right now. Have some people that are designated to be there to answer questions and to reach out to people. And I think you and I have bounced around the idea of having volunteers that are working at the athlete's tent that are solely there to talk to the public, who are there to, explain what's going on, tell them about where to find info if they ever want to get involved and to do things like that. I think that is a good jumping off point as far as making it more accessible to the public. Because anybody can show up and watch it. I wouldn't be in this sport if Jerry hadn't come over to me on the sideline that day at Richmond and been like, no, dude, it's actually super easy. Just go look up these things and find it. It's not bad, right? For a wild turkey, you get a little higher. Yeah.
A little higher.
Yeah. So I really think it would be a huge benefit to have a couple of people whose sole job it is to hand out info or to talk to people while we are putting on a good show. Because I think that goes into the second part of what makes it good for the athlete. And I think ultimately, if you want to have a good show, you and I have talked about this in a few different ways, where good throws look athletic. Good throws are good throws. And while I think it's hard for the audience to tell the difference between a 38-foot open stone and a 40-foot open stone, I think it's very apparent for them to tell the difference between a 25-foot open stone and a 38-foot open stone, Yeah. So if you can give your best athletes the best showcase possible, I think that benefits everyone. I think your athletes are going to be happier, and I think it's a better spectacle to the crowd. Because if you can, working in local government, way to hook grip that. Working in local government will make you realize how much people being happy to be in their work environment makes a difference. And I think if you could make a habit of putting on, and games like No Fame and all that have done, and Danny's games of the Backyard Rebellions, and I think have done a fantastic job of pointing that out. They don't have to be super sanctioned. They don't have to be tied to anything awesome for every good athlete to talk about wanting to be at them. If you gave me, once people start getting serious in the sport, I will travel to the other side of the country if I can afford it to go throw at a good game. If you're going to tell me that, hey, we have bothered to put our money into producing the best implements and the best trigs and the best ground for you to throw on, and your best opportunity to showcase what you've spent the last 5+ years working on, people are going to show up and they're going to want to show up big. And so I think they will go hand in hand to where if you can give athletes a really good experience, it's going to show off better to the crowd. Even if the throws aren't that good, even if, let's say, I just throw my PR of, let's say I threw a 41-foot open stone. I'm not touching Nick Aston's open stone. The dude's a goofy blonde fuck with ab. No, I love you, Nick. But like, it is what it is, but those people are going to be in a better mood, and that's going to be contagious. So if you can give athletes a really cool, open place to do their best and to throw as many events as possible, and I think that's going to benefit everyone. Give them cool prizes. Give them things to talk about. If your pro class is happy and your A class is happy, they're going to talk more to your B class and your C class, and that's going to keep those guys invested in the sport, because they're going to walk away and say, well, this other dude who threw a 30-foot heavyweight come up and chatted with me for half the day, and they're going to have a good experience, and that's going to roll. There's no downside to making your athletes happy.
Absolutely. To touch on both of those, having someone that is somewhere between a historian and a sales person going around and explaining the sport to the crowd and talking about, hey, this is why we're doing this. Here's the historical context. Here's the modern day context. Here's why any of us are spending our weekends doing this, and here's why you should too. I think is a very important aspect in everything we do, whether it be strongman or Highland Games or.
Yeah, it's great when you have someone that can get a chuckle out of the crowd by saying, "Here's Matt McDougall. He's an underwater basket weaver in his spare time. He's going up to throw 17 feet." That's great. That's better than no announcing.
Right.
But it's not the pinnacle. That is not as good as it could be of actually explaining to people why they should be invested and what it took to get there. You have to decide whether it's going to forever be a carnival sideshow or not. I'd prefer it start to bridge the gap into something halfway serious, and maybe it flounders and dies, and that's the way of capitalism, and it is what it is, but I'd have a hard time letting it stay there without knowing that someone tried to push it past that. Because if all you want is a good chuckle and some halfway okay throws, we've already done that.
I think we are both in a position in caring about the sport where I would much rather the sport mean something and never progress to the pro class than progress to the pro class and the sport mean nothing. I'd much rather it grow and be dynamic and showcase the best athletes and draw in the biggest crowds and make it something that means something and be shit, right?
I would rather have every game I go to be full of A's that are throwing 5,900 and up points than for me individually to throw 67 next year and go pro and things never get a little bit better.
Right, absolutely. We actually care about the sport. Moving on from that one, the idea of athletes actually being happy with what they're doing, I think is pivotal. I don't think
make everyone happy. It's not just
Right.
your athletes. It's just the only space I feel experienced enough to talk in.
Right.
I think everyone should be. I think your ADs, your athletes, your vendors, your clans, everyone should be getting something out of this.
Right.
But
I
just don't know enough about their worlds.
If you went to a Spartan race, what you're going to see is a lot of people looking miserable until they cross the finish line, and then they are elated, right? And I think that when a crowd looks in at a Highland Games and they watch a bunch of people look miserable, it's not a good thing, right? I think that having athletes out there that are happy to be there, that genuinely enjoy the sport, is the thing that makes the sport grow, right? If you went to a baseball game and everyone was pouting about missing a swing.
Well, why do the Savannah Bananas exist?
Right, exactly.
Like,
why do any of these slightly above rec leagues, sport leagues exist? If
Globetrotters.
They are.
You will pay to go watch the Globetrotters game, even if they don't score as high as the Lakers.
Yep.
Half of Middle America would rather go watch that,
Right.
as opposed to a quote unquote pro game because it's more fun.
If we are going to continue down the group performer route, you have to have athletes that are happy. And if we're continuing down the route of making it a serious sport, you have to have athletes that are good.
Yeah.
And so if we can have good, happy athletes, I think that you're killing two birds with one stone.
You're going to produce a better overall product.
Right.
I think so. I don't think you necessarily need... This is never going to be an Olympic event. I think to sit there and compare it to the two would be silly. You don't want people taking it that seriously, but I want people to be able to showcase whatever they've worked hard to attempt to do. And if you've spent the last 4 months killing yourself to throw a good sheaf or throw a light hammer, I think you should get the opportunity to throw sheaf or throw light hammer, and I don't think it should be cut. And I know sometimes that's going to be the case, but at what point when you're approached by a venue and they say, hey, we want to have athletics here, but we don't have space for a sheaf tower, or we don't have space for hammers, at what point do you tell them no?
Right.
No one is drawing their sole source of income from this games. Pro athletes or anyone else. So at what point do we just say, we're good? And I appreciate that you want it, and if your festival ever grows to a size where it can accommodate more events, please reach out to us. You know? Or you tell them, hey, I don't think we can put on a full game. Pay me $50 a head. I'll get you some people up here to throw demos. We'll give them all lunches. We'll do all that stuff. Have the public come out and touch the implements. You know? I don't know what the answer would be, but I don't think the answer is to go quantity over quality. I'd rather only have 4 games in the state per year that are all awesome games instead of cutting stuff out.
No, yeah, I agree. I hate going to game. I understand if things get canceled because equipment breaks or
weather or whatever. If there's lightning in the area, I don't want to throw sheaf any more than the next guy.
Right.
You're not offending me. I choose to live.
Right. I don't want to throw heavyweight for distance in a muddy ring. I understand that things have to get cut day of. But like nothing frustrates me more than going to a games that I thought that I drove 8 hours to because I thought it had.
You drove 8 hours. You paid $500 for a hotel
Right.
for 2 nights. You paid $150 in gas. You paid an entry fee.
And then I thought that they were going to have light hammer, and they didn't. And they had time to throw it, and it could have counted for NASCA. Even if it didn't
You
count
took
for
a
the
2-hour
games.
lunch instead.
We took a 2-hour lunch, right? And we decided not to do that, especially as someone when I want people that take the sport seriously to be able to take the sport seriously.
And what is the number of athletes that are in NASCA right now?
For open amateurs, it's just under 1,000.
So just under 1,000
And
people.
to clarify, we are technically just beginning the season.
Okay, so just under 1,000. I'm at 55th. You're at 10th. I think we're relatively qualified to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah.
1,000 people. Let's even say that I'm the
You are in the
cutoff.
top 5%. Right?
Let's say that I'm the cutoff for people that take it seriously. I think it's lower than me.
I agree.
I would absolutely say that. I think there are a lot of people investing a lot of time and their own resources. Let's say that is the cutoff. You have so many people that are taking it seriously and investing time and energy into doing something. Why are we not giving them the opportunity to showcase it?
And
If we can help it.
Right.
And there are times where we can't, and that, it is what it is. And if you're upfront with people, they're going to understand that. It's totally fine. But
and not to be,
because you're going to have a lot of jobbers out there.
yeah, for sure.
If it's the top 100 out of 1,000 people, only the top 10% are taking it seriously.
Right.
But you're appeasing the lower 90%, which are not your best product,
Right.
at the expense of your top 10%.
And to touch on that, without trying to sound like a narcissist here, people take pictures with me at games, and people don't take pictures with anyone else. And part of that is the way I look and dress, because I take the game seriously.
I wish I was allowed to grow a beard.
Right.
It would help.
Right, yeah, having
I have to look so clean cut
Yeah.
and boring at these stupid things.
being, 6'3", 360, and having shoulder length curly hair and a big beard,
It sells the image. It's what you want.
It sells the image, right? And especially when you are going out.
Do you know how annoying it is to not sell the image? First of
Right.
all, if I'm going to stand on my own
Right.
little soapbox,
Right.
just stand over here and be 250 pounds of crew cut.
No, but that is honestly the point. Like if guys like me don't want to come to your games because you are not providing a package in which I can use to fulfill my desire to progress in a sport, right? If I'm someone that takes it seriously, and you aren't catering to the people that take it seriously, and I'm not coming to your games,
You're going to die.
people aren't taking pictures. People aren't taking pictures.
Coming
with-
back year
with
after
second
year.
place, right? They're not sharing it on Facebook. They're not saying, "Wow, look at that freak." And there are guys that are
What was it? Mike Beach's quote that I always loved was, "You come to the circus to see the elephants."
right.
If the elephants stop coming to your circus,
Yep. Right.
you're not going to survive.
Right. And granted, there are guys that are 15% better than me, but in my mind, like when you're talking about athletes, if you're running a games and you don't have a 64 to 6,600 point athlete plus there, right? I'd probably say like 6,300, like a Brett Bracken, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a 6,300 point athlete there, you're not selling the games.
And it's not that hard to find, ultimately. And I understand
Even if you have to pay for that guy, or just make it free to enter, which Chad Clark always does.
Yeah, I completely understand games not having a pro class every single time.
Right.
I get that. It's not that hard to find 1 to 2 super A quote unquote athletes to have at your game.
Mm-hmm.
If you were providing a good game. But some games out there are eventually going to get the reputation of not being a good game for the athletes, and the athletes are going to stop showing up. And then when all you have, and this is not a knock to B-class throwers, I love you, you need to show up. I'm here for it. But if that's everyone that shows up, and your best wob throw is 11 feet for that day, and your best heavyweight throw is 22 feet, that is going to get very old very fast when a bunch of 5'10" dudes are the only people at your game throwing mediocre numbers.
We already have a problem with drunk idiots in the crowd thinking that
I
they
can do that.
flip trees, right?
And
I
I
can
walked
do
the
that
56
mentality.
over to a guy at Port City and let him hold it because I'm not doing that.
I
You know
did
what the words out of his mouth were? I can't do that.
Right.
You damn straight you can't. Now I'm going to get back to trying to throw 14 feet and you're going to sit down.
Yeah, that was Carroll County. I walked the weights over, and I actually made a point with the 56 to walk it over. And
You make it look like you're doing nothing, and then
yes,
damn,
I
you're
put it
dropping
out.
on their
I
tongue.
held it, and this is a testament to strongman strength here, and strength never weakness.
By the way, if you're not going to the gym and all you're doing is throwing, you're wrong.
you're wrong. But you're dead wrong. I'd almost. I'm not going to say that.
No. Another episode.
Yeah, another episode. But
These are the intros. I know
yeah.
we've recorded 3+ hours of
Right.
us talking entry level.
I made a point of taking it with one hand and extending my arm the entire way and holding it out like a front raise, and then putting it in someone's hand with both their hand, and it drug them straight to the fucking ground. And then everyone said, "Oh, let me try to pick that up." And it's like, "Oh, how far did you throw that?" And I said, "I just threw that 38 feet for distance, 15 feet straight in the air." And they said, "Oh, well, what the fuck?" Right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, now this has context, right? And this matters. But if you walk that over to
Dude,
someone and
I
say,
would love when we... Sorry.
Yeah.
Side note. This is what we need to do at our game.
I'm gonna say.
Bring a 55-pound dumbbell
yes,
and set it on the sideline.
right,
And tell a bunch of people to come over and pick it up.
right,
And then ask them how high they think they could throw it over their head if it was on a chain.
right.
We don't need to buy more expensive implements to
Yeah.
do that. You and I both own 50-pound dumbbells.
Yes, we do.
We can bring it out there and set it on the side. Put it at the tent where we're having people talk up the games and talk about demos.
Yeah,
Pick that up. Yeah, it's not easy, is it?
Right.
Could you throw it there above your head? No, you couldn't. Want to come learn how to do it tomorrow?
right.
Done.
Yeah, I'm exactly, and because you're gonna have people that could throw it 20 feet there, but my God, they think they can throw it 40.
And they're going to throw their back out doing it. You're
Yeah.
not going to have a repeatable athletic technique
Right.
to where you can sustain longevity in this sport.
No,
We've all met the random guy that shows up from Strongman who is able to muscle out a heavyweight throw or muscle out a weight over bar.
his Braemar's great.
Maybe
you know.
even throw a caber with the latest pull you've ever seen. So late it would be a second trimester pregnancy.
Right,
But
like bear paw the thing up there.
but it happens to turn.
I was that guy.
Even though they stop their pull at their clavicle and don't actually
Yeah, no triple extension. All
Yeah.
bicep.
But guess what? You know how did an 18-foot sheaf,
Right.
and you threw a 40-foot lightweight because you don't know how to move.
I watched a strongman athlete throw fork and all over 18 because he knew he could do it that way.
Hey, if it counts.
Right.
There's no rule against it that I know of. There might be out there. Does your judge know it? Do they write it down as a check?
Right. Like there's no limit on length of fork, but you're not allowed to just poke it over. So I don't know where the line.
I'm gonna have
is.
a tree saw, but it's a
Right.
fork, and I just
Right. If my fork head is actually just a handle, I know that I can throw it like a wob higher than I can throw a sheaf. Right.
the trouble is there's just 3 pointy ends on it.
Yeah. Well, it depends on how we're defining pitchfork. But it's welcome to our new event.
Hey guys, in case you haven't noticed, the Highland Games is not that organized, which I will refer you back to my magic wand answer. So, yeah.
I think that all makes sense. I think that's a pretty good introduction to Mr. Jeremy Futrell.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to touch on real quick before we move on to...
No, if there's something you want to move on to, or if there's something that comes to me, I will shout it out 110%.
I feel like this is a good stopping place.
All right, cool. Well, let's wrap it up. Until next time, man.